Funding for this program was provided by the Alabama Humanities Foundation, a state program of the National Endowment for the Humanities.
I have no earthly idea. I really don't.
I really don't know. I'm not exactly sure, but I do know he was a French, I think he was French.
I don't really know.
He was a civil rights man.
Yeah, I've seen the picture in the office, but I don't know who he is.
Maybe someone who did something important for the community, so they named the school after him.
His battle started long before the 1960s. I'm not sure whether many of the younger people realize what sacrifices and what courage it must have taken.
We take them for granted now, but there was a time when blacks were not, shall we say, welcome to just walk through the park downtown. That happened to me. I was going across Bienville Square, just going from one crossing to the other. You had to get off of the sidewalk and get in the grass and let them pass. You learned to just put yourself in that position where you knew that one day maybe it would be different. You could go into, shall we say, Gapers. And if there was a white lady being served by the clerk, you had to wait. She would leave you and go and serve this white lady, white and colored. And you knew the difference, so you went to the one that said colored.
Places on Dolphin Street where you would go to eat, it was segregated. The restrooms were segregated, the lunch counters were segregated. It was accepted, it was understood. That's the way life was then.
When he was about 17 or 18, he got on the streetcar here in Mobile, and the driver asked him to get up to give his seat to a white man. And so John didn't want to get up and give his seat. He said he would have given it to a lady, any female, but he did not want to give it to a white man. The white man told him to get up, I'm tired, going back to the back, and he would not get up.
When they got downtown, I think the bus driver had called the police and what have you. So that's when they had it out.
When the police came, John was arrested. The wrongness in that just made him want to fight for the rights of anyone who had been wronged, and particularly by the law. And I think that's when he must have resolved to try to do something about it, because he would often say, every man can try. My father was a postman, and he was a postman, John Leflore.
He basically carried mail to white people, and they loved him. They loved him. He was an outstanding letter carrier. It's a shame that he was not able to rise in the ranks.
Joe Langham was a very noble person. And I heard him tell John the story about being in the war, and he worked beside blacks, side by side for blacks. And he knew what it was in the South for blacks. And he admired the blacks that would just go on and do it, fighting for a country that was not theirs. He thought about himself. You know, if he were black, and he were over there fighting like this, and had to come back to a country that would not even offer them a job, would not allow him to drink from a water fountain. So he decided when he was over there fighting, that when he came back to America, that he was going to do something about that problem. Joe Langham sought John Leflore.
You love your God and love your neighbor. So if you're going to love your neighbor, you've got to see that he has the same rights that you have.
And I heard Joe Langham saying to John Leflore, it has to be changed. And that night I do recall that he and John Leflore shook hands on changing it together. Now this was long before Martin Luther King. This was long before you heard of many people out there doing anything, because you were afraid to. Your life was involved. You're putting your life on the line.
He was a corresponding reporter for two black newspapers, the Pittsburgh Courier and the Chicago Defender. So he covered many of the local events. One in particular was the Monroe, Georgia lynching.
John marched right up there to investigate that lynching. And it was made known to the world.
You have a lot of things in life make you want to turn around. But he didn't turn around. Just kept going.
Protesting certain inequities where the blacks were really looked upon as second-class citizens. He wouldn't just forget it. He would talk about it. He'd write about it. He'd write the President of the United States about it. Small things that no one else would think about. That's one of the things I admired about John. He had such a strong sense of right and wrong.
We were the first city in Alabama to have Afro-American bus drivers. We were first to have Afro-American policemen. We were the envy, you might say, of the other section of Alabama. Whenever we would travel, the question was always asked, how did you do it? How are you doing it? We said, well, we have a wonderful leader in Mobile named Mr. John Leflore. Mr. Leflore began to accomplish a whole lot in the city of Mobile. The way he did that, he would make contact one-on-one. He didn't head on with a big organization or something. He was able to maintain good relationship with many white friends throughout the city.
His approach of doing things in a legal way, the same way that on the bus desegregation, where they had so much trouble in Montgomery and other places over it, Miss Rosa Parks had to go to court and get arrested and everything with it. But in Mobile, we arranged with him and others to have a black get on the bus, and we'd have him arrested and took the case to court and had the segregation ordinance declared unconstitutional. That was the end of bus segregation in Mobile. I mean, we just did things in a reasonable, logical way rather than having a lot of confrontation and a lot of problems over it.
We were able to get along in that day through the leadership of Mr. John Leflore.
John never advocated a march. He felt that you could do more talking to a man than you could by marching to the man.
To quietly present the problems and work on a man's conscience. You know, John Leflore was the quiet person who wrote these letters, who would ask you to talk with him, who would doggedly stay on you, trying to get you to talk to him, and writing you, nagging you to death with letters, you know, and searching your soul for right versus wrong. And any man with a conscience really and truly cannot turn his head. And if you have no conscience, shame on you. You're lost anyhow. He could tell you that such and such a person came to my door at 2:10 on the morning of such and such a date, and he had been beaten by police, you know, and he'd have pictures to show. And what human being could not look at that? A leader in a community could not at least look at that and think, this is wrong. Some said to John, this is wrong, but I cannot do anything about it. And some said, this is wrong. Something should be done. But, you know, some of them even said, you are possibly going to get killed.
he contacted me about several things that he felt. Of course, at that time, there were no blacks voting, and that was one of the things he was interested in. And the other was well, the school teachers, the black school teachers in Mobile County were paid one salary level, and the white school teachers were paid a higher salary level. So he asked me to see if I could do anything to straighten it out. So when the school board came to see me to try to get some taxes passed, I was the only senator from Mobile County, and whatever I said went. I mean, they couldn't pass any legislation without my consent pertaining to Mobile. So I told the school board we would not adopt any taxes for the schools unless they equalized the pay and paid people according to their merit and according to their degrees and not according to their race. And so finally they backed down and agreed to go ahead and do it.
So someone asked me today, where were you going? I told them where I was going, and she said, Mr. Leflore is responsible for me getting my job at the city. And she'd been there like 20 years, yeah, there are pockets of people in Mobile that John himself is responsible for them, either through advice or actual hands-on getting work or going to school.
He go to the top man and explain to them, how can you live with yourself and deny a person the right to work? How can you deny him the privilege of feeding his children, of having a home? This is racial and this is wrong. And he just did it over and over and over and over again, person to person.
He had filed suit on the railroads where he was discriminated against on the railroad. That was one of the first actions that he took in the civil rights movement. And say a lot of these things were long before the civil rights in the 60s. I mean, even back in the 40s, we were doing things to bring about change.
He did not believe in the sit-ins and the stand-ins. He thought that the peaceful negotiation, and if you cannot negotiate, then go through the courts.
The NAACP in the 20s were real strong. He was the head of it.
John Leflore was executive secretary.
In 1956, they outlawed the NAACP in the state of Alabama.
When we was outlawed from the NAACP, he formed the Nonpartisan Voters League.
It was the NAACP underground.
Mr. Leflore, through the Nonpartisan Voters League, began to work on civil rights.
This was John's desk here, and the secretary was back there.
He started at the bottom, and he figured, oh, they'll give up this little thing as long as we don't want to marry them, as long as we don't want to move in their neighborhood. So each thing, it was started with a little thing. I want to eat at that lunch counter. Okay, we'll let you. So it kept on. He always had someone from Washington, from the justice system down to check on these things, these test cases, I call them. And we'd type them up and mail them off. And see, a lot of places like Scott had government money, so they had to come check it out.
He had papers all over his desk, naturally.
Chairs loaded with papers. Little things sitting back here loaded with papers.
We'd come in and try to help him straighten it up occasionally, but then that didn't help much because he's gonna keep it cluttered anyway.
Once he set his mind on something, whatever it would take for him to accomplish that goal, he was that. I've known him to stay up 11, 12, 1, 2 o'clock working on different civil rights projects.
You wonder why and how he could put in the hours that he put in.
We often would tell him that he was overworking.
Sleep was almost nothing for John. I think the man hardly slept 4 hours a day after day after day. And I don't know where he got this energy from, but he had the energy.
He would keep at it until he get the job done. That's the type of man he was. He didn't let anything get in his way.
He never gave up. You must remember now that during that time, Mr. Leflore was under constant criticism on both sides of the track, mine, yours, and his, and everybody else's. And I guess this is the way it is with most men who are a little bit in their time. You said before their time. But I think those men are in their time, and Mr. Leflore served his.
His children had to have suffered. I'm sure that Tia, his wife, had to feel some repulsion because of the time. I imagine that it would have been a little unfair to her to give up that much of this man, but she gave it up gracefully. And I say, behind any successful man, there is a woman. Run to the post office, run to the press register.
He taught the matter of self-respect and respect for authority. As a child, I'll say prior to age 14, Dad would come home in the evening and I'd have to massage his legs for about 15, 20 minutes using alcohol. And believe it or not, I can understand just what he might have been experiencing on a day-to-day basis. And really, retrospectively, I enjoyed those moments that I spent with him there. Many mornings I'd wake up and there he would be at the typewriter working.
What he did from his heart and what he thought was best for everybody, and not something that was going to lead him to have front page headlines or anything. He was the type of person who would sit back and let other people take credit while he was doing the legwork. Everything has to have a start, and he was basically the start of most of the things that developed in this community.
He was very high on education. He was self-taught. He did not graduate from college, but I bet you he could have held his own. You would have enjoyed listening to him.
We had a dual system of laws that were almost inflexible. There was one kind of justice for whites and another kind for blacks. And whites generally back in that day were intransigent in their viewpoint on the race question. Those who showed any degree of moderation were usually classed as Negro lovers, and they were very strongly ostracized in white society.
He remembered everything. He had a phenomenal memory.
He was not easy to work with. He was very difficult to work with.
You had to dot all I's and cross all T's. Your words had to be pronounced correctly. Enunciation and pronunciation. He had strong convictions about everything, but the strongest conviction about right and wrong. Now, I would tell him all the time, I hate you, but I sure do worship you.
I knew him well at the Postal Service because he challenged the promotion and hiring practices of the Postal Service. For instance, blacks could only work as janitors and carriers. We could work as carriers because we had to carry the mail. It was heavy. But in the inside of the post office, they were selling stamps, they were clerks. We couldn't work as clerks. Those jobs were reserved for white people. John Leflore challenged that, and they got rid of that system. We couldn't use the bathroom downstairs at the Postal Service. He challenged that, and we were able to use all of the bathrooms at the Postal Service. We couldn't work as supervisors. He challenged that, and I became a black manager.
He would eventually get it in court in some fashion, either directly or indirectly involving him. And the test case usually would come out and he would usually win.
They came back at him saying that he was un-American and his activity was un-American and tried to prosecute him. They couldn't do it. We had a 30-minute lunch period. And so they would go out there and they would say he spent 31 minutes for lunch, and therefore he was beating the Postal Service out of money.
Petty charges, like he would cross in the middle of the street. He wasn't supposed to.
He would be up half the night indicating the statutes and so forth that might have permitted him to cross the street because some inspector was on his tail. They were specifically after him because of his activities with civil rights.
Everybody who could hassle him, hassled. He was arrested at the Junior Miss in Mobile. People were picketing him.
He called me Randy. He said, "Hey, Randy." He patted me on the shoulder. He said, "You know what?" I said, "What that, Mr. Leflore?" "Keep your head up. Keep going. Don't give up." Those are his words. Said, "Now the goal that we are pursuing, maybe," he said, "it's gonna get pretty rough and dark, but don't give up." Said, "Hang in there. because the goal that we are pursuing is noble and is right and is just. I said, well, okay, buddy.
Leflore had to almost stand by himself, and with very few people that would help.
25 to maybe sometimes 40 or 50 people would be in the meetings.
They would fuss and get mad with each other. Wiley Bolden would get up and walk out of the meeting, and the next night they would be crying. They might stay mad for 2 or 3 days, and then they'd make up. They'd be crying, now, John, you know that you shouldn't have done such and such a thing. You shouldn't have said such and such a thing. And tears are flowing down. And John, well, you know, Mr. Bolden, that this and that, and you know what the rules are, and we cannot break the rules. Now, why would you say this or why? And both of them, tears are just coming down. And that meant that it was over. Purifoy, same thing with Purifoy.
He knew how to put things together.
And tell us, said, now I tell you what to do. Said, let's think over this particular thing for a few days and let's come back. And I believe we can handle it better. He knew how to keep harmony among the members because he never showed any kind of superiority over anybody.
He would be walking the streets and he would look at children and be thinking, this would be his idea. They could integrate this place. This child could integrate this place. Bernie Mae Davis' mother said John had already chosen her to integrate Murphy High School. And he would walk with her through the streets. She would walk with him, and they would talk about integration. And he would tell her of the inequities, and that someone had to be strong enough to stand up against them. And someone had to try to do it, even if they failed. And she did it with as much calm as you would expect someone that age to do it with. And they gave her full protection too. There was body shield.
We had to escort her through axe hounds, sticks, all kind of profanity, cursing. But we didn't stop. Mr. Leflore didn't. We were determined not to let nothing stop us from our goal of seeing that Afro-American children will get the same education, equal education as anybody else.
John played one heck of a role, and I think the things that he did in Mobile were felt nationwide because it was the beginning of black people moving forward.
There were a number of blacks who were actually living out there in chicken coops and big carton boxes and things of that nature. And so we were able to put in water and sewer services in all those areas and to build public housing for those that could not afford other housing. This is a picture here of Mr. Leflore and myself breaking ground for the Jesse Thomas home.
John made certain that we could go in the 5 and dimes and places that had lunch counters, and he made it so that we knew how to approach the people in those places, and they would serve us.
The first day that they started, I went for lunch. So I wasn't the first one in there, I was the first lunch customer they had. My husband once remarked, you're gonna get killed over a sandwich. But somebody had to start it.
Then we'd go in, sit at the counter, wait until we were served.
It was like staring race hate directly in the face. And boy, God must have been looking out for me because I was just right up there, and John was too. People hate you and they're showing it. They're blatantly showing it. They're staring you down, they're scowling and I mean, it was there. It was there for you to see, and people would run out behind you and get his tag number and all, trying to intimidate you. And he would say, oh, don't worry about it. They do that everywhere I go. So, it was like, if you're not worried, I'm not worried, bro,
We'd watch them break the plates and things like that after they served us. Now that's an oddity that you might not believe, but they would serve you and take the plates and throw them into the wastebasket. Take the glasses or whatever they serve in, throw them and break them. All of that, but then we stuck it out. We stuck it out.
We couldn't get angry. We just sat there and quietly, pleasantly took whatever they said. And then we'd go write it up and type it up and turn it in. Once we went to the train station. John really, really zeroed in on that because they were riding in separate coaches back then and sitting in separate rooms, waiting and eating at separate places. So we went to this G&O and we ordered. And this lady was very rude. She got the food from the back and she stood at the end of the counter. And we were on one end and she was on, and she slung the plates down, mine first, and it came all the way down, all just rattled. And if movies had choreographed it, they couldn't have done better. And it just rattled and sat right in front of me. Then she slung his down there, and it did the same thing, and it sat right in front of him. And of course I wanted to laugh, and I kept saying, and he would, don't do that, don't laugh. This is very serious, you know, and it was so funny. Have you ever been anywhere where you're not supposed to laugh, like in church? I think I wet myself. I did. But she sang, "Go back where you came from. We don't want you here."
He knew that if he went into court on every little thing and filed a suit, it would be constant headlines and could turn certain parts of the community against it. Rather than do that, he worked with certain elected officials and would go to them and explain the problem.
That, shall we say, broke the segregation in the eating places.
He was trying to create a feeling of everybody working together to accomplish.
That was amazing. While the other part of the state was in uproar in Montgomery.
Escape the bitterness here in Mobile.
For people working in various places, John would interview them over and over and prepare them as best he felt that he could. He would make certain that they knew what they were expected to do when they got jobs in the bank, jobs in the stores. Now he would talk to the people in the stores and the banks about, we're going to send some people down. I want you to interview them, and if possible, give them a job. And most times they pass with flying colors.
And we went to South Central Bell, and up until that time, we had no black telephone operators in Mobile. So I go in and I break the ice and I do an interview, and they get to see me and talk to me, and well, maybe they're just not so bad, you know, after all. And I did a lot of those. Mobile Gas, Alabama Power. You go in and you do the groundwork for them, and then after they get in the mindset of really, we got to open this up, it's coming anyway, then he would send some people to work there.
eventually you got people integrated here and there and what have you, so it worked.
I was working on my master's in chemistry there at Atlanta University, and I was eating in the dining room, and Martin Luther King came in to the dining room, and he didn't go to the teacher's cafeteria to eat, and I saw him over there eating by himself. I said, I think I'll go over and introduce myself to Martin Luther King, and I'm going to have my lunch with him today. So I marched over and I introduced myself to him. And I said, would you like for me to have lunch with you today? And he said, well, sure, if you like, you know, small talk. And so he said, now, what did you say your name was? I do remember this distinctly. I said, you're supposed to have such a good mind. I said, I'll tell you one more time. And I told him, Janet Owens Leflore. So he said, you would not by any means be related to John Leflore in Mobile, Alabama, would you? I said, I'm his daughter-in-law. And he said, oh, is that right? And he said to me, he said, I have had the greatest admiration for John Leflore. He said he was out there doing it when none of us would take a step in the direction. He said, I have the greatest admiration for John Leflore of Mobile, Alabama. John Leflore respected and admired Martin Luther King. The way they were doing things, totally different.
That's one of the things that John and Martin Luther King could talk about. What are we going to do about this and so? John would tell him, we've done thus and so, and this is what the results are. And it made things, it made it much easier for Martin Luther King not to want to come to Mobile.
They wanted King here. They wanted this big, massive parade and blah, 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 and the powers that be didn't. They didn't want that publicity and that sting on Mobile.
I do think that he was not really needed in Mobile because Mobile had made so much progress.
John was doing a tremendous work, and Martin Luther recognized that.
Kennedy sort of courted the black people in the South. If you do this, I'm going to see that this is done. And all of them came out in force. John and NAACP and all of them got the blackout, got them to vote for Kennedy. He's going to do this and this, and nothing happened. And Kennedy won. Nothing happened. And I can remember John and Mr. Thomas here at the Beacon and Mr. Bolden and Purifoy all met over there one day, and they were fired up because, you know, time was going on and Kennedy wasn't doing anything. And they were calling him all kind of names, you know. He lied to us, blah. So they decided to go to Washington. Kennedy didn't or couldn't meet him that day, and Bobby met him. And Bobby took that on himself. I think Bobby was the force that got John to sign this and do that. But they came back with an elevated opinion of Bobby more than they did John. So a lot of people give John Kennedy credit for signing this and signing that and getting integration, and Bobby was the driving force behind that. And they came back and talked about how he listened. He just stopped all calls and leaned back and listened, and then agreed with them and got his brother to do all these things. Any litigation, anything like that, he was always calling Bobby on the phone. They were in love with Bobby then, you know. He could get to his brother.
The Nonpartisan Voters League, John Leflore, had chosen Vivian Malone to integrate the University of Alabama.
They would be discussing it, what steps they would take, how they ought to go about it. I know they talked to Bobby about sending the troops up there. They knew what Wallace was going to do, and they had all that worked out. See, everything, John didn't do anything half-heartedly.
Incidentally, we think of Mr. Wallace as being a very fine man nowadays. We did not think too well of him when he said that blacks could not go to the University of Alabama.
I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
One part of his life That's all that all of us could hear. Vivian Malone is going to integrate the University of Alabama. Oh, he was there now the day that Wallace confronted her.
I, George C. Wallace, do hereby denounce and forbid this illegal and unwarranted action by the central government.
The Nonpartisan Voters League, they were right there on the front row, giving her whatever support, whatever protection. And it certainly took a lot of nerve to take that last step. But I think that Vivian knew and believed in the people who were behind her, supporting her. And it worked out. She did a good job, like the Bertie Mae Davis case.
The Nonpartisan Voters League screened candidates and they put out the pink sheet. They endorsed candidates.
John would set them up for an interview, and they would come in and they would be interviewed in front of everybody. But John would have structured questions, you know, what do you think about this issue? What did you do about this? And then after they weighed everything, they went out and they did research. They found out as much as they could about the man.
The pink slip prevailed over all the rest of them because you could trust Mr. Leflore.
The pink sheet was it, and this was circulated through the black population.
Woo! Thousands of them. Over 40, 50,000, something like that.
If they all voted for one person and then the white vote is split, then that particular person has the advantage of having all the black votes.
Mr. Leflore was not afraid to lose his life to accomplish his goal.
I felt threatened whenever I would hear some of his friends, or even my friends, state that, man, he's either crazy, or he doesn't know what he's sticking his neck out to do, or what injuries he might sustain as a result of the things that he's doing, or how someone may even harm you children.
Someone shot through the front window of his house.
Well, if you was involved, you was in danger.
I had the cross burned in front of where I was residing. I didn't know they were out there in front until I got up the next morning and saw the charred cross out there in front of my residence there. So I didn't actually see it when it was going on. Of course, we had a lot of threats. In fact, there was some of the White Citizen Council and some of the others were going to get me killed and everything else.
Two men would always walk out with John. This was their way of protecting John.
Going to and fro from these meetings, who knows what was lurking out there?
What we were doing was right, and we were going to do it no matter what.
He had a post office box 1091. He would give us the key and say, well, you go down and pick up my mail for me. And many times we would pick it up, and often there would be threats on postal cards.
One instance, the phone rang, I picked it up, I answered.
What size shoe does Mr. Leflore wear?
What size of shoe? Well, what do you want to know for?
Well, I want to make sure that we get the right size to make his new cement shoes. Because that way, when we kill him and we dump him in the Mobile Bay, he'll sink and he ain't gonna float.
I was trembling from head to toe. I could hardly put the phone back on the receiver. And I told John and Tia what had happened. And so they were unmoved. I said, aren't you scared to death? He said, John, no. I said, Tia, doesn't this worry you? She said, not anymore. She said, they have been coming all these years, Janet, and I just pray that, John will be safe. So John said, oh, it's just some nitwit out there, and I'm not afraid. He said, and also this is the time I think he said to me, you cannot be afraid to walk through life. You must walk through life and do what you think is right to do, Janet. It didn't upset Tia. I said, Tia, how can you stand this? So she said, well, at one point in my life, I did not think I could go through life like this. She said, but everything that John tries to do is for the good of somebody. I think he should have given the children more time. I think he should have given me more time. He said, but at some point in my life, I just let go of that because that didn't seem to be as important as the work that he was doing. He said, and I see the work that he's doing. I see the good that he's doing out there. I'm a little shaken up, but I'll go to sleep tonight. And I guess she did at some point in time sort of leave it with God. We were really asleep. The phone started ringing. And Beck said, oh my God, they bombed the house. I said, which house? He said, Mom and Daddy's house. The house has been bombed. And I said, oh no.
Why? Two innocent people.
I saw that Tia and John were both okay, both of them. Just almost out of it though. And Tia's eyes, I'll never forget the way her eyes looked. They were just so desperate, as if this is it, Finally it has happened.
The area that was destroyed was the area where my father spent most of his time at night typing.
He said that he had been away from his chair less than 10 minutes, and he was about to doze off, go to sleep. Then it happened, and he was shocked, and he did not know at first that it was really in the house. I said, but what about the shaking, John? He said, yes, the whole house shook. Shambles, everything just in shambles. The cabinet that was over here, all the dishes and everything, And it's just, I think it was laying on the floor, kind of over there.
They say it was dynamite. The case was never solved.
The next day, he was back at the Nonviolent Voters League office typing something. And then the next thing we heard, the good people of Mobile were putting forth efforts to rebuild the John Leflore home. And I think that was just miraculous. And the way people participated, the way people brought checks and money, I think before 3 months, that was enough. The city of Mobile, the people of Mobile certainly proved their weight in gold when they came to the rescue of John and Tia. It was very, very inspirational to John.
He got a better place to live, and he's still going to continue to fight.
So Mr. Leflore was heading up a civil rights organization where we headed up a civil rights movement, the #1 militant organization organized in 1968, the Neighborhood Organized Workers. We certainly took to the street and boycotting and picketing and demonstrating.
In fact, they had persons who were ready to burn, baby, burn. And that was never John's idea.
In 1968, we hit the street almost every night. We had a march, a demonstration, we were picketing somebody.
Well, that didn't change the people's hearts.
Every week, we had 300 or 400 people here for 2 years. So that's a movement. Then there became a struggle for leadership. Who would lead the masses? It was obvious that the masses were out here with us.
John thought of the NOW as surely a Johnny-come-lately, but also as a group who perhaps had not done as much research as they should have done.
We loved one another, but our philosophers, he often told me that that if you're not careful, you're going to get into trouble. And he was always concerned about me. In 1954, they outlawed segregation. But in 1963, Mr. Leflore was able to get into Murphy High School. So we've gone 9 years and nothing had happened. It was moving too slow. And Mr. Langham was a man who tried to keep the peace, but he was not trying to expand opportunities. We were trying to do that. And our point to Mr. Langham is that you're a great peacekeeper. We give you an A for that. Our time has come. Get out of the way.
And he may have helped himself get defeated by sticking up so strongly for blacks, because there were a lot of whites who voted against Joe Langham too. And a lot of blacks did not vote for him.
What we did in 1969, we called on a no vote. So all of these candidates said that they're not going to do anything for us. Why are we going to the polls?
And that killed Joe Langham, just like that.
I got beat by a few hundred votes.
That hurt John about as badly as any one instance that I could think of.
He was devastated. He said, how on earth could good-thinking people vote out a man, do anything that would cause a man like Joe Langham? He said they'll never, ever have a friend like Joe Langham.
We want them to know the balance of power is in our hand. You can endorse all that, you can get all the pink sheets to endorse you want to. We have the balance of power, we're going to prove it to you, and that was our point.
He modestly said, no, he did not think that he would be the person to run. We could look for another person. And of course, all the members of the Non-Partisan Voters League, we begged him, you are the person. You are definitely the person to run. When we finally convinced him, he said, well, if you all will stand beside me, I'll make a try. Now, the first effort was in vain. In the second time around, we had to beg him again. And this time he won, state representative.
As a result of that, became, as I said, one of the first black members to be elected to the legislature since Reconstruction from Mobile County.
I remember the smile on John's face. He said, well, you all did it. And I said, what? You did it? That's what I remember, and of course we were all so happy.
He accomplished a lot up there, but not by getting up and making fantastically flamboyant speeches. He went in a quiet way of making friends with other legislators, because you had to have other people to help support the bills you would bring about.
John sat next to me in the House, and I was chairman of the delegation, and in the State House we had assigned seats. So we had the opportunity to philosophize. I mean, he was not shy, and and telling me what he wanted, and I was not shy in telling him whether or not it was realistic or not. So we had an open line of respect and communication.
He would do his homework and explain to him what he was trying to accomplish. And he would get bills passed in the legislature that you would never think would go through.
If John had lived longer, you would have seen far more changes in the state of Alabama.
That has consistently happened. People have not learned to accept their fellow men for what they are instead of on a basis of race or color.
He would never have gone forward with the change of city form of government if he had listened to me. Because I told him very frankly, John, you cannot change the city form of government of Mobile, Alabama. That you cannot do. He said, oh yes I can. Because the way it is now, we do not have fair representation. And I'm not just talking of blacks. I'm talking about fair representation of this community, that community, people who live there, who know what the community needs.
The 1901 government pretty much set us up to knock out any participation.
We had 3 commissioners that were rotating as far as who was mayor in the city of Mobile. And you got to understand, back then, everybody was elected at large. They were not elected by districts.
Wiley always felt, like John, that we should have a place in Mobile
for every district to have representation, not just the black districts.
It took 10 long years to accomplish that. Just think about that.
He said, if I don't change it, someone will change it somewhere along the way, and I'm going to try.
That was his last goal.
Through John and Wiley, well, a bunch of us, we managed to get that done.
The courts made a decision in September, but I just wish he had lived until that day when the announcement came. But he didn't. He said, I just keep having this dream, as soon as I get sleep, that I have died, fallen in a bathtub and died, but I'm on an airplane. And then this became a joke. And I said to him, well, John, they do not have bathtubs on airplanes, so you can forget that one. And that was a joke between us. The phone call came Friday morning, maybe 7:30-ish. Tia said, what's Walker doing? I said, well, he's sleeping. I said, shall I wake him up? He said, yeah, wake him up, tell him his daddy fell in the bathtub. And of course, when we got here, it was too late. He had had a massive heart attack.
73 years old.
Telegrams, phone calls.
From people in all walks of life. Some from Thurgood Marshall, state senators, United States senators.
Black and white.
Huge funeral for Mr. Leflore. Huge funeral for Mr. Leflore. He was highly respected.
Mrs. Leflore had asked if I would eulogize. I wrote a resolution and passed it through the House. That resolution praised John, acknowledged him.
Whereas John L. Leflore was widely recognized throughout the entire state of Alabama and throughout the United States of America for his tremendous contributions to mankind, especially in the field of civil rights.
You can sit any place on the bus now, and you can eat any place you wish to go.
He helped integrate the schools, and he helped integrate restaurants and bathrooms and water fountains and the Mobile County Commission where I work today.
We had to have white friends to help us.
And we've got to be tolerant of one another and work with one another.
One person can make a difference. No, we always say, well, I'm just one. No. If one person is dedicated and has a vision and perseveres, I love that word with John, it describes him.
All that he wanted was that the rights would prevail, that the wrongs would someday be right. And that was all that he really wanted.
Funding for this program was provided by the Alabama Humanities Foundation, a state program of the National Endowment for the Humanities. If you would like a video copy of this program, please write to Public Television Services, 700 Donald Street, Mobile, Alabama 36617, or call 1-800-239-5233.